Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Tiffany Miller. I work on the frontline support team, and we are doing support for Terra. So there is another member of my team here today that's also presenting, so we're happy to be here to tell you more about Terra and about Anvil. All right, so Ali just mentioned if you haven't yet registered, please take a minute to do that during this presentation so that you can actually do the hands-on portion of the workshop. We'll add you to a billing project so that you can run some compute during the workshop. So the learning objectives for today, I'll be focusing on how to, explaining how to use workspaces to organize your research project components. We'll go over again where to find curated workspaces of interest. We'll talk about how costs are computed and how to set up billing. So when you leave the workshop today, you'll know how to do that. And then we'll go over some key sharing and security features that are built into Terra. All right, so let's talk about Terra as Orchestrator. So Anvil democratizes cloud-based analysis by making best practices more readily available to the research community. In particular, the Terra platform orchestrates the cloud compute and storage resources needed for a given analysis. So these two icons there are actually Google Cloud's icons for compute and storage. And you can think of Terra as the compute engine of Anvil. There are two ways of accessing the platform. So there's a anvil.terra.bio, and you can also access the platform through app.terra.bio. So Terra utilizes containers to standardize the computing environments, making it easier to ensure reproducibility. So I'm sure many of you have had to work with the same data on more than one computer, and you've run into problems with either the version of software or not having a dependency that you needed. This obviously hinders progress, and if you don't have the right versions, it could even impact your results. So containers help solve that problem and eliminate those issues. And you'll need to make use of these containers when you run workflows in Terra. And luckily, there are lots of containers available that you can use that lots of organizations make public. So ultimately, Anvil aims to facilitate your analysis by starting the cloud-based resources only when you have requested them and shutting them down when you're done. And this way you can make the most of the cloud by only paying for the compute when it's needed. And we want to make use of the cloud, and as Liz mentioned as well, so that we can scale our analysis and not have to pay for the continuous cost of the infrastructure that maybe we only maximize occasionally. And there's a graph in the slide that shows how our genomics platform at the Broad, how spiky our resource usage is, and it reflects again why it's nice to have that option instead of building up a really big data center so that you can scale. All right, so let's talk about workspaces. Before we go into that, to kind of anchor you, there is sort of 4 stages that we like to think about for the analysis, and we like to align those stages to how you can think about Terra. So input is what you start with, right? It's your raw data resources. It may require you to do some acquisition work to get the data that you want to use for your research. Processing is the step that's more generated and automated. This is what we typically use Whittle to do, automated scripts and the processing work. The kind of next step is more of your tertiary analysis. It's more manual, it's more specific. You're interacting with the process data, visualizing it, performing statistics. The completion of this stage should address the hypothesis and lead to some scientific conclusion that you would like to share. And the outputs are something that you would incorporate into your manuscripts, talks, or whatever communications. And so the final spot or final stage is sharing. And we put a little example of bioRxiv here where you can obviously share your preprints, but that's something that other scientists would eventually take advantage of, maybe what you've done or build off of your work. So let's see how Terra brings all of these components together in a workspace. So this is kind of your dedicated project space. It's your landing page that gives you an overview of the components of your analysis. You can think of all these different tabs as going through that. So the first one is the dashboard documentation. So here you can see, you can edit the dashboard. It's in Markdown, and usually you want to include information here to ensure that people that are also looking at your workspace, maybe that you're collaborating with, can understand and reproduce your work if that's the point that you're sharing it. Then we have the data tab. So that keeps track of all of your project data, no matter what size or where it is. There's basically built-in tables, and you can point to all the data that you want to use. And then there's the two modes of analysis tools. We've got notebooks for interactive analysis, which are Python or R-based Jupyter notebooks. You can also bring your own image. We'll talk more about that later. And then there's the bulk analysis workflow section, and that's where your whittles will be. Finally, we have job history, so you can kind of monitor and troubleshoot any of your bulk analysis submissions and see what's going on. So we'll take a closer look at each of these in the next tutorial, but we'll go back and talk about the workspace again. So you can think of your workspace as your computational sandbox where you can access, organize, share, and analyze your data. It lives in a cloud environment, as we've said. So you can see here the workspace sits within the cloud. And at the heart of the workspace is the data model, expressed as workspace data tables. You'll hear that terminology a lot. You can think of these as like spreadsheets. It helps organize your data in different cloud-based repositories. We have these nice little bucket images because in the Google Cloud, they're called Google Buckets, where you store your data. And when you create a workspace, you actually, with it, create a Google Bucket. And that's where you can have data that's associated with that workspace living or outputs from your analysis. You can also point to other places in the cloud and use that data if you have authorization of those Google buckets within your Terra workspace. All right, so what does the data piece look like for Anvil users? Currently, the CCDG and CMG data for GSP members through Anvil has been made available as workspaces that are shared via the CCDG and CMG access lists. So here's a screenshot of a few of the restricted access Anvil data sets, which you can browse and export directly to your own workspace for analysis. Terra also hosts the open access data sets, and for example, 1,000 genomes you can find here. It's in something we call a data library, where we try to organize all of these data sets. So we mentioned the two different modes of computation. You're going to hear a lot of this information again and again. It's just to try to help you remember it. So this is the bulk analysis. You can think of, again, more of the processing. This is where we do a lot of our GATK analyses. Terra does the heavy lifting of managing the cloud resources, so you don't have to worry about that, and you can just run your automated pipelines. All you need to do is configure them on your data, and then you can run them. And then the interactive analysis, again, for visualizing your data, any size in real time, and we use Jupyter notebooks right now for that. All right, so let's talk about streamlining your bulk analysis. So open, shareable, and modular principles mean you often do not need to write your code from scratch. You can search DocStore or the Broad method repository to add these workflows to your workspace. And you can do things like align and QC your sequence data per sample with these workflows that are already available, call short variants per sample. You can join call across populations, and even do filtering and QC of your variants. All right, so after running workflows on your data, you want to interact with your data. Obviously, we talked about that. Here's an image of what RStudio looks like. There's a specific project image for the Anvil, so you can load that up in your runtime environment, which we'll go over more later, and interact with RStudio. There's also lots of great notebooks that are pre-made. If you're not a super expert with coding, there's a lot of notebooks that we make available in our curated workspaces that you can actually import and take advantage of those and edit them and learn as you go along. So that leads us to curated workspaces. So here's just a screenshot of them. This is basically our section where we show new and interesting featured workspaces. Like we worked on providing a lot of the workflows that our viral genomics group uses right now for COVID research. We put those in the new and interesting section for people to see them very easily. And then we have featured workspaces. We have collaborators that reach out to us and say, hey, we want to feature a workspace about XYZ analysis or about this tool or that tool, and we can, we work with them to get that in a good position to make it public for people. So we do get requests from people to do stuff like that. And then we have a team that actually curates some of these GA2K, for example, workspaces. All right, so this is how you access the showcase workspaces. You can access it through the landing page of Terra or through the main navigation menu. At any point using the hamburger menu, you can click showcase. All right, let's talk about sharing and security. So linking your accounts within Terra in the profile page is how you can access the controlled data. So when you click to link your account, you'll be redirected to a page that you may have seen before. Here we are. And this is, if you've already have authorization for, TCGA data or GTEx, there's a lot of different ways that we link with these basically whitelists to give you access to view workspaces with that data in it in Terra. So here's just some instructions on how you can link your account from the profile page. And yeah, you'd use your ERA Commons or NIH account with your dbGaP access to get access to that within Terra to use it. All right, so one thing to note is that for security reasons, your account connection will expire after 30 days. So you'll see here NHGRI, Anvil Data Commons Framework Services. This will expire after 30 days just for security purposes, and you'll have to relink it. All right, so let's talk about collaborating and sharing in Terra. You're probably not doing your research in a vacuum, and you'll probably want to use these workspaces to share and collaborate. So how does Terra do that securely? Well, workspaces are shareable and they're in your control. You can just share them with a click and control how much access that each collaborator has. And here are the examples of the different roles. But when you initially create your workspace, it's going to be private by default. You'll be considered the owner of the workspace, and you can share it as a reader, writer, or another owner. And there's built-in security and privacy functionality, especially if you have private data. You don't want to accidentally have maybe your collaborator share it with somebody that shouldn't be seeing it. So we have this concept in the system called authorization domains. And that's where you can actually identify who's allowed to see this data. And we'll talk more about that. So here's a little schematic of how this works. And you can think of it like a badge that's on your workspace that allows researchers with the same badge to access the workspace. You can clone a workspace with an authorization domain, and its badge will always stay with the new copy. So again, this solves a problem if you have a collaborator that you've shared a restricted data workspace with. If you have an authorization domain set up, if they try to share it with somebody else, or if they clone a copy, try to share it with somebody else, that data doesn't get leaked. If the person's not in that authorization domain, they're not going to be able to view that data. So this is kind of solving that problem of making sure that things are secure within the system. So Michael mentioned earlier more about some of the security and privacy built into Terra. So we are FISMA moderate, which is granted by NCI for hosting controlled access data by NCI or NIH. Being on top of the Google Cloud, we are a FedRAMP authorized. And finally, we've introduced a feature for clinical researchers to have a 15-minute timeout for added protection. All right, so let's talk about costs in Terra. How are you accruing costs? So here's some examples. When you try to access data in Terra, there's this concept of requester pays. And it's basically, if that's set up on the Google bucket, it means the requester who wants to egress this data has to pay for it. So that is one way if you're trying to access data, maybe when you're doing a computation and it has that set up on it, then you'll be paying for egressing the data from the Google bucket. There's also storage costs. So if you store data in your Workspace's Google bucket, there's some cost for that. We show that amount in the Workspace. And when you're running workflows, obviously you're spinning up Google Compute, and so you'll have to pay for the compute. And then when you run Jupyter Notebooks, you're actually doing it with a Dataproc cluster from Google, so that again will cost some money. And throughout the system, we try to share exactly how much you're spending, and we're working on improving that always, I would say, so people have a good sense of how much you're spending. So the way that you're actually billed for this is, I'll note that Terra itself is, doesn't cost money. We are actually just, let Google kind of deal with that. So, because they're providing the resources and the cloud. And so you actually need to set up a Google billing account in order to get started. So the Google billing account will fund any of the research that you do in your workspace. And the way this works is if you have a Google billing account set up, a lot of institutions have Google billing accounts already set up, and you can work with your your grant staff to figure out how to connect that. But the Google billing account, you basically share the specific email address that links to Terra to your Google billing account, and then you can do the linking within Terra. So once the Google billing account knows about Terra, then when you go into Terra and you try to create what we call a Terra billing project, you'll see the option of that Google billing account show up, and you can actually link the two. And then when you're done doing the linking, you can actually remove from that Google billing account any, the Terra address if you're concerned about that connection. So once you've got that connection, you've got that Terra billing project set up, then you can use that Terra billing project to create workspaces. And the workspaces are basically, when you create them, you choose that billing project, and any cost that's accrued in that workspace will go to that billing project. So, is there a question? I just heard some movement. No? Okay. All right. So, some notes, if you're in the Google console and you're looking at kind of your bill and stuff, there is owner or administrator roles that you'll need if you want to have detailed cost breakdowns in the GCP console. So just note that there's basically a way to set up who can use that billing project, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But here we show a few ways of kind of getting access to billing projects. So you can work in a collaborator's workspace and not have to worry about setting up a billing project. If they give you owner or writer access and they've already set up the billing project, fantastic. You can still work with them and not have to do that. You can also use a collaborator's billing project. So when the billing project gets created, there's two roles. I'll show you those later, but there's basically a user role that you can have, and that grants you access to create workspaces using your collaborator's billing project. And then finally, obviously, you can set up your own Google billing account and link it to Terra to work. And so for today, we actually set up a workshop billing project. And so that's what we've asked you, if you haven't already registered and you need access to that, we'll grant you access to that so you can move forward. All right, and then I mentioned when you create a workspace, here's a little picture or screenshot of that. When you create your workspace, this is where you'll see your billing project. Okay, these are the steps. Again, you can set up your GCP billing through your institution. There's also third-party resellers like Onyx, for example, that will help you do that for you. And you can also use a personal billing account or credit card. Okay. I know I'm kind of going over time, so I'm going to try to speed it up here. We've already talked about the billing project roles, owner or user. So if you want more information, you can go back to that. And now that we've covered the basics of billing and authorization, let's do a walkthrough and see how these work in practice. So Allie will be leading that session. And I'm going to skip the summary because I've already went over time. So Allie, Want to take it away?